If you ever want to understand anything, it is essential for you to know how to infer properly. Because understanding is essentially based on a proper inference of the proper premises in the appropriate way. And an inference is simply the drawing of a conclusion. They are the same thing. So if you infer, you draw a conclusion, and if you draw a conclusion, you infer. And in this video, I will tell you about 3 types of inferences. Let us start with a deductive inference, or an induction. A deductive inference is simply a logical conclusion from a set of premises. And logic works such that something is a logical conclusion if and only if it is a conclusion of what must be true given the premises. So say, for example, let's take the 2 premises. First one, I have a phone. Second one, all phones are expensive. So with those 2 premises, we can logically, deductively infer that my phone is expensive. Because if all phones are expensive and my phone is one of all phones, then my phone also has to be expensive. And a neat thing with deductive inferences are that as long as you actually deduce or deductively infer the inference properly, and as long as the premises are actually true, then the conclusion has to be true. And that, of course, is very useful to try to understand, to know things. The hard thing, of course, is to make sure that the premises are true. As you can understand, we can absolutely, let's say, for example, let's say that all phones are cheap. Then it is still the case that given the premises that all phones are expensive and I have a phone, that my phone is expensive. That is still a proper deduction made, even if phones are not expensive. So it is only as long as all of the premises are true that the deductive inference is true. But as long as that is the case, then the deductive inference has to be true. Next type of inference, induction. Induction is also quite interesting because inductive inferences is what science is based on. So an inductive inference works by drawing the conclusion that if something has happened again and again and again for very many times, that it will happen next time, or the time after that, or the time after that. This is an inductive inference. And as I said, this is how science is done, right? This is the basis, or part of the basis of the scientific method. Because in science, they make controlled experiments and they attempt, they make experiments and see if something is true. And if they can seemingly control for any other variable, and the same thing still happens again and again and again, then they assume that this is true, and that is how science is made. However, one weakness of an inductive inference, because just like deductions, inductions also have weaknesses, and one weakness of an inductive inference is that they don't have to be true. Unlike deductions, that if the premises are true in an inductive inference, then the conclusion has to be true as well. This is not true for an inductive inference, right? So just because something happened again and again and again doesn't mean that it will happen again next time. And this is an essential quality of inductions. A problem that was formulated, I think, by the 1700s philosopher, the 18th century philosopher, David Hume, if I'm not mistaken. And so what Hume pointed out is that just because something happens again and again, it doesn't mean that it has to happen the next time. A classical example of that in philosophy is how Europeans thought that all swans were white, and then when they came to Australia, they found black swans. But they had previously made the inductive inference that all swans are white because every time they ever saw a swan, it was white. Now to the third and final type of inference, which is called an inference to the best explanation. And an inference to the best explanation is simply an inference more or less based on your gut feeling, your sudden intuition, your previous experiences of things. To give an example, let us say that you have two friends, Fred and George. They are at your place. Let us say also that you have a cake in your fridge. Fred loves cake, so much so, in fact, that he has a problem with not eating them. Is if he can get away with it, if he thinks he can get away with it, and even sometimes when he thinks he cannot, he just has to have that cake, or at least a piece of it. And let's say George hates cake. You have never seen George eat cake ever. And then let's say you leave the house and you tell them, don't eat any slice of the cake, don't eat the cake at all. But then when you come back home, you see that a piece of the cake is missing. Now, an inference to the best explanation would be to say that Fred had a slice of the cake. He loves cake. George hates it, right? Without any form of actual inquiry, without trying to analyze anything or understand anything, you just draw that conclusion. That is an inference to the best explanation. But this, of course, just like with the previous two, this type of inference has a weakness, because it is not necessarily true that you are that your gut feeling is true, right? It is not necessarily the case that your gut feeling is true. So, for example, it could absolutely be the case that Fred actually managed to control himself this time, and that it was George who got curious because he never eats cake and he wanted to try a little, and he thought he could get away with it, because surely you would assume that it was Fred, let's say, or some other logical possibility. So that is absolutely a weakness of an inference to the best explanation. I would say out of these three, it is the absolute least trustworthy form of inference. And something I think you can understand by now, if you didn't already understand it, is that not all inferences are created equal. If you have a deductive inference based on proper premises, that is more trustworthy than an induction. And an induction, a properly made induction, let's say a scientific induction, is absolutely more trustworthy than an inference to the best explanation. And to know what form of inference is made can help you to know how to discriminate between this and that conclusion. And because our beliefs are based on our different inferences, it is also true that not all beliefs are created equal. So it is not really what you believe that is important as much as why you believe it. And if you take anything with you from this video, I hope it is exactly that. Don't believe something because this or that person believed it, or because you were told to believe that, or anything to that effect, but rather because you have gone through it rationally. You have made the proper inference based on the proper premises. Thank you.